My son called me 39 times in the 4 days after I changed my will. He hadn't called once in the 3 days I spent unconscious in the ICU. I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a school librarian, the kind who remembered every child's name and which books made them cry. I buried my husband 18 months ago. I raised my son with everything I had, and until the afternoon I collapsed in the parking lot of a Kroger on a Tuesday in September. I genuinely believed that the distance between us was just life getting in the way, that he was busy, that he needed space, that good mothers don't crowd their grown children. I was wrong about all of it. Before I go any further, if you've ever been made to feel like a burden by someone you loved unconditionally, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. I'd also love to know where you're watching from. Your city or country matters more than you think. And for transparency, some details in this story have been adapted for privacy and educational purposes, but the truth at the center of it is entirely real. The morning it happened started like every Tuesday. I drove to Kroger for a few things. Nothing dramatic. Creamer, bread, the specific kind of crackers my grandson liked on the rare occasions I saw him. It was warm for September, that thick southern heat that lingers past Labor Day and refuses to apologize for itself. I was loading the bags into my trunk when I felt it. Not pain exactly, more like the ground tilting, a pressure behind my left eye, a sound like static filling my ears. I sat down on my bumper. Just for a second, I told myself. Just give it a second. Then there was nothing. When I opened my eyes, I was looking up at a paramedic who couldn't have been older than 25. A woman was kneeling beside my head, one hand holding mine, her other hand pressing something to my cheek. I didn't recognize her at first. My vision was doing something strange, soft at the edges. "You're okay," the woman said. "I've got you. You're okay." Her name was Diane. She lived 3 houses down from me and had for 2 years. We waved at each other across the yard. We'd shared a bottle of wine exactly once, the night her divorce was finalized. We were friendly the way neighbors are friendly, close enough to borrow things, not quite close enough to call at night. But she'd been in that parking lot buying flowers for her mother's birthday. She'd seen me go down. She'd stayed with me until the ambulance came, and then, without anyone asking her to, she'd followed that ambulance to the hospital and sat down in the waiting room. The stroke was described to me afterward as mild. A TIA, technically. A transient ischemic attack. The doctors were careful to explain that it was serious, that it was a warning, that the fact I was sitting upright and speaking clearly 48 hours later did not mean I'd been lucky so much as that I needed to pay very close attention going forward. Blood pressure. Rest. What I remember most from those first hours is the ceiling of the ICU. White tiles with small square holes punched through them. A pattern that doesn't mean anything but that your brain tries to find meaning in anyway when you're lying very still and there's nowhere else to look. Diane was in the chair beside my bed when I woke up fully. She had a paper coffee cup and dark circles under her eyes, and she'd clearly been there a long time. I tried to say her name. My mouth felt thick. "Don't," she said. "Just breathe. The doctor will be here soon." I looked at the other chair, the one that was empty. Where was my son? The doctor was a calm man in his 50s named Dr. Hartley, who explained everything twice and then handed me a printed summary so I wouldn't have to rely on memory. He used the word warning several times. He said that with medication adjustments and lifestyle changes, my prognosis was genuinely good. He said I'd been brought in quickly, and that had made a difference. He also said, in the careful way doctors say certain things, that the hospital had reached out to my emergency contact several times, that they'd left messages. I asked what number they'd called. He read it back to me. My son's number. The right number. "Were you able to reach him?" I asked. Dr. Hartley glanced at Diane. She was looking at her coffee cup. "We left several messages," he said again. Miss 1. Diane here provided consent for treatment as a witness to the event. I nodded. I thanked him. After he left, I lay there staring at those ceiling tiles and tried to remember the last time my son had answered the phone on the first try. I couldn't. Later, after the nurse had been and gone and the room was quiet, Diane put her phone face down on her knee. "I don't want to show you something," she said, "but I think I have to." She turned the phone around. My son's social media profile. My daughter-in-law had tagged him in a photo posted Saturday afternoon, the same afternoon I'd been brought in. The two of them in stadium seats, broad smiles, foam fingers. The kind of photo that says the afternoon is exactly right and nothing could improve it. My daughter-in-law's caption, "Perfect Saturday. These are the days." Below it, a second post from Sunday. A family brunch somewhere with white tablecloths and mimosas. My daughter-in-law and her parents, her sister, her brother-in-law. My son in the center of the frame, relaxed, laughing at something off camera. My grandson Cooper beside him in a button-down shirt, gap-toothed and bright-eyed, his small hand wrapped around a glass of orange juice. I looked at Cooper's face for a long time. He was 8 years old. He didn't know his grandmother had been in the ICU since Tuesday. Of course he didn't. No one had told him. The third post was from Monday. A photo of my son's home office, his desk cleared and organized. The caption, "Back to it. Good weekend. Ready to crush this week." I handed Diane her phone. She waited. "Did they pick up when the hospital called?" I asked. "I don't know," she said, but her voice told me she did know. "The phone works," I said. "They were posting all weekend." Diane didn't say anything for a moment. Then, quietly, "Yes." I closed my eyes. I want to tell you that I was angry right away, that my first feeling was the clean, clarifying kind of fury that makes you certain and decisive. But that's not what happened. The first thing I felt was something much older and more familiar. The hollow thing I'd been carrying around since my husband died 18 months ago. The feeling of being in a room that used to be full and now wasn't. I'd gotten good at living alongside that feeling. Good at telling myself it would pass. But lying in that hospital bed with Diane beside me, a neighbor, not family, I finally had to ask myself the question I'd been avoiding for a long time. Not where was my son, but when had I started making excuses for him so automatically that I didn't even notice I was doing it? It started the year before my husband got sick. That's when I think I first understood, without letting myself understand it, that something had shifted. My son had married my daughter-in-law 6 years ago, and I had loved her, genuinely, the way you love someone your child chooses. She was sharp and organized and funny in the kind of way that keeps a room alive. I wanted to know her. I tried. But the visits grew shorter. The holidays became negotiated territories. I started getting the calendar dates for Cooper's school events 2 days before they happened, after travel would have been impossible. I told myself they were busy, they were building something. I didn't want to be the mother-in-law who made things hard. When my husband got sick, my son came for the first weekend. He was tender with his father in a way that made me think I'd been worrying about nothing. He sat beside the bed and held his hand, and the three of us watched old baseball games on the small TV, the way we used to on Saturday mornings when he was a boy. Then he went home on Sunday evening. He called twice that week. Then once. Then I stopped counting. My husband died on a Thursday morning in March. I called my son at 6 a.m. He arrived on Friday. He stayed until Sunday. At the memorial service, people told me how composed he was, how strong. He stood straight and shook hands and thanked people for coming. 2 days later, he told me he needed to get back for work. That I was strong and would be okay. I watched his car back out of my driveway. Then I went inside and sat on the kitchen floor for a very long time. After that, the distance became the normal thing. Visits dropped to once every few months, then less. Cooper's birthday last year, I sent a gift and received a photo text 3 days later. Christmas they spent with my daughter-in-law's family in Colorado and called me on Christmas morning for 12 minutes while I sat alone at the table with coffee and the radio on. My son said it had been too hard to travel with the time and cost. I never complained. I was afraid that if I asked for more, I would get less. This is what I was thinking about in that hospital room, not the stroke, not my medication. The 30 years I had spent being careful not to need too much. I was discharged after 4 days. Diane drove me home. She helped me inside, settled me on the couch, made a pot of tea, and refused to leave until I ate something. My son called that afternoon. His voice was easy, the way voices are when the person speaking has already decided how the conversation will go. Mom, oh my gosh, I just got the messages. What happened? Are you okay? He'd had the messages for 4 days. He said he'd been at a work conference. No cell service. I didn't point out the baseball game, the brunch, the Instagram photos. I just said I was home and recovering. He said he'd come by as soon as things settled down. Things had a way of never settling down. But he called twice the following week, and once the week after. And my daughter-in-law sent a text that said, "So glad you're feeling better," with a heart emoji. And I told myself this was something, that they were trying, that the scare had reminded them. I was still making excuses. I hadn't learned anything yet. That changed on a Wednesday morning 3 weeks after the hospital. I was sorting through mail at the kitchen table. Bills, a magazine, the usual. There was a legal-size envelope near the bottom, white with a return address I didn't recognize. A firm I'd never contacted. Elder Law Specialists, the address said. My name was printed on the front in a font that looked official. I opened it. Inside was a cover letter and a document. The cover letter thanked me for my initial inquiry and confirmed they'd received the information I provided. It referenced a phone consultation that had already taken place. With me, supposedly. I had never spoken to these people in my life. I read the document. It was a draft power of attorney, financial and medical, both. The kind that transfers complete decision-making authority over a person's life to someone else if that person is deemed unable to manage their own affairs. The designated agent line was filled in. My son's name, my daughter-in-law's name, both of them. The section describing the basis for the arrangement listed several checked boxes. Cognitive decline, inability to manage finances independently, history of medical emergencies requiring supervised care, potential risk of living alone. Every single box was a lie. I set the document down on the table. Then I picked it up again and read it from the beginning. More slowly this time, the way you reread something, hoping the words will rearrange themselves into something less terrible. They didn't. At the bottom of the cover letter was a note. The firm was following up on the timeline. They wanted to schedule the formal signing at my earliest convenience. They noted that the process would go more smoothly if the primary individual, that was me, participated voluntarily. Voluntarily. I sat in my kitchen for a long time. The tea I'd been making went cold. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at something in the yard. The clock on the microwave blinked 10:47. Then I called Diane. She was at my door in 4 minutes. She read the document once, twice. Her jaw tightened in a way I'd come to recognize. When she looked up at me, there was something in her eyes I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. Someone being angry for me, not at me. How long do you think they've been planning this? She asked. I thought about it. Since before the stroke, maybe longer. Because I remembered something then. 2 months before the stroke, my son had called on a Sunday evening. Unusual. He rarely called on weekends. He'd asked questions I hadn't thought much about at the time. Was I still driving? Was I keeping up with the house okay? Had I had any trouble with the bills or the account since Dad passed? I'd answered easily, honestly, not understanding what the questions were for. And then my former colleague Carol, a woman I'd worked with for 20 years at the library before we both retired, had mentioned to me over lunch that my son had called her. She'd mentioned it casually, the way you mention something that seems mildly odd but not alarming. He'd asked how I was doing these days, whether I seemed like myself, whether I'd said anything concerning lately, whether she'd noticed any changes. Carol had thought it was sweet at the time, a concerned son checking in with his mother's friends. She'd told him I seemed absolutely fine. I'd let that lunch conversation pass through me without stopping it, filed it under things that are probably nothing. It wasn't nothing. I thought about who else he might have called. My neighbor from across the street, my doctor's office, the woman at my church who organized the Wednesday morning group, people who knew me and would report back honestly that I was fine, healthy, capable, and who would be puzzled by the questions but not suspicious of them. He'd been building a case, the same way someone builds a case before walking into a courtroom, systematically, carefully, before I ever ended up in that hospital. The stroke had been unexpected, a gift from his perspective probably, a real documented medical event he could point to. My hands were steady when I called the number on the cover letter. I told them I had never authorized this inquiry. I told them I had never spoken to their office and that any information they had received had been provided without my knowledge or consent. I told them clearly and politely that any further contact should be directed to my personal attorney. Then I hung up and called Catherine. Catherine had been my family's attorney for 12 years. She handled the estate when my husband passed. She knew our finances, our history, our family. I told her everything, starting from the hospital and ending with the document on my kitchen table. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a pause. Then, she said, "This isn't the first time I've seen this." She asked if I wanted to act. I told her I did. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to know you're still here with me. If you believe a parrot deserves to be treated with dignity even when they're no longer useful to someone's plans, type 1 in the comments. If you've ever discovered that someone you trusted was building a case against you behind your back, type 2. And if you believe it is never too late to take back what's yours, type 3. Your comment tells me you're here, and right now that matters. Catherine and I spent 2 hours on the phone that week and 2 more in her office the following Tuesday. We rebuilt my estate from the ground up. A trust for Cooper, $120,000, designated exclusively for education, with Catherine named as trustee and no parental access until he turned 18. My son and my daughter-in-law could not touch it, could not redirect it, could not use it for anything other than the purpose it was built for. Cooper would be protected. The rest was distributed carefully. A significant donation to the County Library Foundation, the place where I'd spent 31 years. A scholarship fund in my husband's name for first-generation college students at the local community college. A bequest to Diane, for reasons I'll explain. And an amount for myself, enough to live on comfortably, travel, and do exactly what I wanted with the rest of my life. My son received nothing. My daughter-in-law received nothing. Catherine asked me twice if I was certain. I told her I'd been certain since I sat in that hospital room looking at stadium photos. She filed everything and had it witnessed and documented and legally airtight within the week. She also had my physician prepare a formal letter confirming my cognitive status, my mental clarity, and my complete legal capacity. Dated. Signed. Filed alongside the will. Then I called my son and told him I'd like to meet. He arrived at my house on a Saturday morning. My daughter-in-law was with him. Cooper was not. He had a soccer game, they explained, and they didn't want him to miss it. I noticed they came dressed for a meeting. Not casual. Not the clothes of a son visiting his mother. Business dressed. My daughter-in-law wore a blazer. My son wore the kind of khakis that suggested someone had thought carefully about first impressions. We sat in the living room. I offered coffee. We talked about nothing for a few minutes. Cooper's soccer season, the weather, something in the news. Then my daughter-in-law said, with the practiced ease of someone who'd prepared a line, "We actually wanted to talk to you about your situation, Mom, just to check in and make sure everything's being managed well after everything you've been through." I looked at her. We were thinking, my son said, picking up the thread, that it might make sense to formalize a few things, just to make sure you're protected. Nothing dramatic. Just some legal arrangements so that if anything happens, we're positioned to help you quickly. I let him finish. Then I said, like a power of attorney? A half-second pause. Something like that, yeah. Just common sense at this stage. The stage being what exactly? My son shifted slightly. You're 63, Mom. You live alone. You just had a stroke. We love you and we want to make sure you didn't come to the hospital, I said. The room went quiet. We explained that you posted photos that weekend. Saturday at the baseball game. Sunday brunch. Monday back to the office. The hospital called your number repeatedly. You had cell service. You simply didn't answer. My daughter-in-law's expression changed, just slightly, around the eyes. There's more, I said. I placed the copy of their power of attorney draft on the coffee table. I watched them look at it. I watched my son's throat move. I received this from a law firm I never contacted, I said. Filed on my behalf using information you provided, authorizing the two of you to take over my medical and financial decisions, based on cognitive decline that doesn't exist. My daughter-in-law started to say something. You called Carol, I said. You called my friend. You asked her if I seemed confused, whether I was managing the house, whether I'd shown any concerning changes. I looked at my son. You called me 2 months ago asking about my accounts, about the bills, about whether I was driving safely. You were gathering evidence. We were worried about you, my son said. His voice was flat now, the performance thinning out. You were worried about the estate, I said. There's a difference. My daughter-in-law leaned forward. This is a misunderstanding. We were trying to be proactive, to make sure that if something happened, something did happen. I spent 4 days in the ICU. You were at a baseball game. Silence. I thought of my husband's last weeks, the way my son had held his hand that first weekend and then slowly, quietly stopped coming. The way I'd covered for him without being asked. The way I'd told the hospice nurse our son was traveling for work, when really he'd just stopped answering the harder calls. I thought of the Christmas I'd spent alone with the radio, the 12-minute phone call, the 31 years I'd been a librarian, memorizing the names of other people's children because my own had forgotten mine. I thought of Diane sitting in a parking lot, holding a bouquet of flowers for her mother's birthday, watching a stranger collapse beside a grocery cart, choosing to stay. I changed my will, I said. My son's chin came up. Cooper has a trust, $120,000, for education, protected from both of you until he's 18. The rest goes to the library, a scholarship in your father's name, and to Diane. My daughter-in-law's voice went sharp. Who is Diane? My neighbor, the woman who called the ambulance, the woman who slept in a waiting room chair and held my hand when I woke up. You gave our son's inheritance to a neighbor. I gave your son's future to a trust that protects it. I gave a significant portion of the rest to causes that mattered to the man I spent 40 years building a life with, and I gave a portion to the one person who showed up when showing up cost her something. My son stood up. This isn't fair. I looked at him. When you were 7 years old, you fell off your bike on Greenfield Lane, and I sat on the pavement with you for 40 minutes until you stopped crying. I missed a faculty meeting. I didn't tell you it was inconvenient. I stayed. He didn't say anything. When you were 16 and you failed your driving test the first time and called me from the DMV, I left my lunch break and drove 30 minutes to pick you up and didn't mention it again for 10 years. When your father was sick and you stopped coming, I told people you were busy because I didn't want them to think less of you. I have been making myself smaller and quieter and easier to carry your whole adult life, and you still found me inconvenient. My daughter-in-law put her hand on my son's arm. Let's go. At the door, my son turned around. His voice was tighter than I'd heard it. You're going to be alone when you actually need help. You know that. I looked at him for a moment. The boy from the bike and the DMV and the baseball games we used to watch on Saturday mornings. The person I had oriented 30 years of my life around. "I've been alone," I said. "I've been alone for a long time. The difference is I've stopped pretending otherwise." The door closed. Diane was in the kitchen. She'd been there the whole time, not in the room, not intruding, just present the way people are present when they understand what you might need afterward. She came out and handed me a glass of water. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it honestly. Lighter. The calls came in the days that followed. My son first, several times, trying different approaches the way you try different keys on a lock. Apologetic one day, frustrated the next, rational the day after. He said I was acting out of grief. He said I'd been manipulated. He said his father would be upset. I answered some calls and not others and kept my responses brief and certain. My daughter-in-law sent a long email. I read it twice, acknowledged it in 3 sentences, and did not reply further. What surprised me most was how little it destroyed me. I had spent so long believing that any distance between us was my fault, that if I could just be less needy, less present, less inconvenient, the relationship would correct itself. What I found instead was that the relationship had never been what I'd believed it was. The grief I felt wasn't for what I'd lost. It was for what I finally had to admit had never existed. Catherine sent the finalized documents. Everything was signed, witnessed, and ironclad. She said if they attempted to contest the will, they would lose and spend a significant amount doing it. She seemed pleased. I liked her very much. I began to move forward in ways I hadn't allowed myself since my husband died. I started the cardiac rehab program Dr. Hartley had recommended. I walked every morning 30 minutes, the same loop through the neighborhood, and began to notice things I'd stopped seeing. The way the light fell through the oaks on Callaway Street in the early morning. The way the air smelled different in October than any other month. Small things. Mine. Diane and I had dinner twice a week. We talked about books and her daughter and the divorce she was still processing and what she wanted to do with the second half of her life. She was 41, 22 years younger than me, and sometimes the age difference disappeared completely in the middle of a conversation. She had never asked me for anything. She had simply been present, steadily, without agenda. I thought about what that meant, what I'd mistaken for family, and what family had turned out to actually require. Carol came to visit on a Saturday in November and I told her what had happened, all of it, including the phone calls my son had made to her. She was quietly furious in the way longtime librarians are furious, contained, precise, and lasting. She brought me a casserole and we sat on the porch and she said she was sorry she hadn't mentioned the call sooner, that something had felt odd about it and she'd let it pass. I told her she hadn't done anything wrong. I told her I'd let a great deal pass for a very long time. The Library Foundation called to thank me for the bequest. The scholarship fund was established in my husband's name and the first recipient had already been notified. He was a 20-year-old studying engineering and he'd written a thank you letter that used the word grateful 4 times and meant it every time. I kept the letter on my kitchen counter for a week. Then one afternoon in December, Diane knocked on my door. She was holding someone's hand. Cooper stood on my front step in his winter jacket, a gap-toothed smile. Those bright eyes I'd been missing for months. He was carrying something under his arm. A rolled-up piece of paper, slightly crumpled. "Hi, Grandma," he said in the small, unsure voice of a child who isn't certain of his welcome. I knelt down without thinking about my knees. He walked into my arms and I held him there on the doorstep for a long moment. He smelled like cold air and the particular kind of soap that schools use and something sweeter underneath it. I held on. "I missed you," he said into my shoulder. "I missed you too, sweetheart, so much." He pulled back and held out the rolled paper. It was a drawing on manila construction paper, the kind used in second-grade classrooms. Crayon, careful and elaborate. A figure with white hair and a red coat standing in front of a yellow house. Beside her, a smaller figure with what appeared to be an enormous smile and stick arms raised in the air. Below it, in the large, careful printing of an 8-year-old, "Get better, Grandma, I love you." "Yo. Mom was supposed to give this to you," he said. "When you were sick. I made it at school." I smoothed the paper with my thumb. "She must have forgotten," I said. "But I have it now." I walked him inside. We made hot chocolate, and Cooper sat at my kitchen table and told me about his soccer season and the book his class was reading, and the fact that he'd recently lost 2 teeth on the same day, which he considered a personal achievement. I hung his drawing on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a sunflower. He looked around my kitchen. "I like it here," he said. "It's home," I said. Whether the visit was authorized, whether my son knew, whether there would be a conversation about it afterward, none of that mattered in that moment. I sat across from my grandson and watched him drink his cocoa and thought about what it means to be someone's family. It's not a thing you inherit. It's not assigned at birth and permanent, regardless of behavior. It is made every day by the choice to show up. Diane showed up in a parking lot with a bouquet of flowers meant for her own mother, and she made herself my family by staying. Cooper, 8 years old and innocent of everything the adults around him had done, showed up with a crumpled drawing and his gap-toothed smile and his small voice saying, "I missed you." And he had always been my family, would always be, whatever happened next. My son's calls slowed down and then stopped. I didn't know what had been said in that house. What had been explained to Cooper or how? What version of me existed in the stories my daughter-in-law told? I couldn't control any of that. What I could control was the drawing on the refrigerator and the hot chocolate on the counter and the door that was open whenever Cooper wanted to walk through it. I'm 63 years old. I had a stroke in a grocery store parking lot in September and spent 4 days in the ICU without a single family member beside me. I discovered that the people I'd been making space for my whole life had been quietly maneuvering to take over what remained of it. I disinherited my only child. I donated my husband's legacy to students who would never know his name but would carry something of him forward anyway. And I woke up one morning in January and realized I felt like myself. Not the version of myself that had been slowly hollowed out by years of accommodation and apology. The earlier version. The one who remembered every child's name. The one who sat on pavement for 40 minutes without checking her watch. The one who had always known, somewhere underneath the years of making herself small, that she was worth more than the scraps she'd been accepting. I started planning a trip. I'd always wanted to see the Oregon coast. The dramatic kind, rocky and cold and nothing like the manicured beaches in the vacation photos that had greeted me in that hospital room. I booked it for April, 1 week. Solo. My first trip alone in 40 years. The ticket is on my desk. I look at it sometimes just to confirm it's real. People will tell you that you can't cut your own child out of your life without destroying yourself. They're wrong. What destroys you is the long, slow erosion of your own worth by someone who was supposed to love you unconditionally. What destroys you is the decades of excuses, the miniaturization of your own needs, the quiet, ongoing grief of being treated as an inconvenience by someone you made from nothing. What heals you is the neighbor who stays, the drawing on the refrigerator, the 8-year-old who says, "I missed you," and means it completely. The attorney who looks at you and says, "I've seen this before and I know how to stop it." The colleague who brings a casserole and sits on the porch and asks you to start from the beginning. What heals you is the moment you stop waiting for someone who has already decided to leave and start paying attention to the people who are choosing every single day to stay. My son had my number saved in his phone. He had it for 39 calls in 4 days when he thought his inheritance was at stake. He didn't use it in 4 days when my life was. That told me everything I needed to know about what I had been worth to him. And when I finally stopped pretending otherwise, when I finally let myself know what I had always, somewhere, known, that was the day I stopped being someone who waits to be chosen and started being someone who chooses herself. I'm not finished. I have a full life ahead of me. I have a grandson who likes hot chocolate and construction paper drawings, and visits I intend to make as frequent and as full as a child deserves. I have a neighbor who became my family by refusing to walk away. I have a trip in April and a scholarship that carries my husband's name forward, and a library that meant 31 years of my life and will now have a little more of me beyond that. And I have this. Whatever this is, you, listening, wherever you are tonight. If any part of this story is yours, if you have been making yourself small, making excuses, waiting for someone to finally see that you're worth the showing up, then hear me on this. You don't have to wait anymore. The people who deserve you are already there. You've probably been overlooking them because they don't require you to earn their presence. You teach people how to treat you. For a long time, I taught the wrong people the wrong lesson. When I changed it, they didn't like it. That wasn't my problem anymore. If this story stayed with you, please consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you found something real in these words, subscribe to this channel. There are more stories here, honest ones, about people who chose themselves after far too long, and about what became possible when they did. Thank you for being here. Thank you for staying until the end. You are, right now, part of the family I chose.